So our last speaker from Poland, from Warsaw, Institute of Philosophy and Sociology, Pasamonik Barbara, and she is going to talk about a very recent development, very nasty development, what happened in Germany, in Cologne, on New Year's Eve, 2015, and I'm wondering to watch the Polish view on this. Please, have the floor.
Okay. Thank you for invitation for this very fruitful workshop. Yes. Okay. Sorry. I propose to analyze concrete accidents, I think, about mass sexual assault on 2015 New Year's Eve in German cities. So I start from consider that this mass sexual assault on a Western woman on the street of German cities in New Year's Eve committed by the migrants coming from non-European cultures, especially Muslims, caused a media panic which focused on the safety of Western women in the context of migration crisis. And what is important, two conflicting theories created a climate of moral panic. The first theory, put forward by left liberal circles, tried to undermine or understate the role of cultural differences in mass sexual assault and prefer to stress the role of social factors in these events because culturalism is in this milieu is perceived in this milieu as a new form of racism. So the second theory promoted by the right wing saw the main cause of the events in the intercultural differences, and the proclaimed idea of clash of civilizations referred directly to the famous hypothesis of Samuel Huntington about an inevitable clash between the Western world and Islam. And the right-wing circles kept arguing that refugees were potential terrorists and rapists, and that we should defend our homeland against them. We should keep the barbarian hordes away at the gates of Europe. So the intercultural differences in this kind of argumentation appear to be essential and inevitable, unchangeable. This kind of perception of intercultural differences leads to ethnicization of the problem of sexual violence. So the aim of my paper is to diagnose the role of social and cultural factors in the mass sexual assault on Western women committed by the foreigners. These events were perceived by most of the Europeans, of the European public as a manifestation of barbarity. The contentious issue was whether it was barbarism motivated by social circumstances or barbarism motivated by the different culture. So, of course, the answer for this question is not easy in the context of emotional public debate, I mean neither political correctness imposed by left liberal circle nor historical panic among the right-wing circles serves to achieve a reliable diagnosis. So let's start from testing Samuel Huntington's hypothesis of clash of civilizations by Ronald Inglehart. I believe that I don't need to present Huntington's theory, so we start from Ronald Inglehart. So let me remind that according to Ronald Inglehart, Samuel Huntington was only half right. The cultural fault line that divides the West and the Muslim world is not about democracy, but sex. According to the result of two ways of the World Values Survey conducted between 1995 and 2002, Muslim and their Western counterpart want democracy, yet they are worlds apart when it comes to attitude toward divorce, abortion, gender equality, and gay rights. In other words, World Values Survey confirms the first claim in Huntington's thesis, culture does matter. However, Huntington is mistaken, is assuming that the core clash between the West and Islam is over political values. According to Huntington, the real line between the West and Islam is concern gender equality and sexual liberalization. What is more, the difference between Islam and West in these two fields is greater among the youngest generations. An important role in this division was played by the countercultural movement and sexual revolution of the 1960s, as younger generations in the West have gradually become more liberal. Islamic nations have remained the most traditional societies in the world. So the counterculture in Western world accelerated the liberalization process, but at the same time, it is very important, initiated an internal war in the West between, we can say, between liberals and conservatives, which has been continued incessantly up to now. According, in my opinion, the clash of values between liberalism and conservatism is now taking place in a double reference system, intercultural and inner cultural. This means that polarization of values refer both to immigrant living in Western societies, to Western societies themselves, and to the communities of migrant origin. The West is, in other words, the West is not uniformly liberal, and similarly, the Muslim culture is not uniformly conservative. Attitudes towards moral values divide the Western European societies as well as the Muslim diaspora. And the main object of this conflict is female corporality, sexuality, and gender. This conflict in the intercultural sphere is manifested by the European debates and prohibition of Muslim veil in public space or burkini in the swimming pools, as well as the problem of the sexual harassment of girls at public swimming pools by young Muslim boys, or sexual harassment on New Year's Eve 2015 in German cities. So let's consider this case study, I mean the mass sexual assault on New Year's Eve 2015. According to the report of the Bundeskriminalamt, it is Federal Criminal German Police, on New Year's Eve 2015, only in Cologne there were approximately 900 attacks of sexual character. Totally on New Year's Eve, over 1,200 women were attacked. Out of 2,000 men who took part in the assault on women, 120 suspects were identified. Half of them were foreigners who came to Germany a few months earlier. They were mostly refugees, illegal migrants. Those who were identified most often came from North Africa, Algeria, for example, Algeria, Egypt, Morocco, Tunisia. Rarely it were Syrian citizens. The New Year's Eve assault had a typical scenario. German women walking alone, aged 18-24, were surrounded by a double circle of men, and then in the atmosphere of street hustle, which was made even greater by the attackers, they were touched, insulted, robbed. It is worth noting that mass sexual assault also took place although in a smaller scale before and after the New Year's Eve in different German cities, as well in other European countries like Sweden, Finland, Austria, Switzerland. Okay, the report of German police included a working diagnosis of the New Year's events. Its authors concluded that dynamic group processes were the cause of the New Year's Eve events. This enigmatic term indicated the connection of several elements. First, it is spreading of Egyptian practice called Taharush Geimei in the street of European cities, uncertainty about the future, peer pressure, and absence of police. The practice of let's start from Taharush Geimei. The practice of sexual assault in Egypt has been systematically growing over the last few years, especially during concerts, political demonstrations, and mass religious festivities. A real explosion of Taharush Geimei took place during the Arab Spring at Tahrir Square and in the streets of Cairo. This practice became popular thanks to social media, and then it spread to Algeria and Morocco, and with migration waves to the countries of Western Europe. So we can ask, it is social or cultural barbarism, yes? According to the diagnosis of Ronald Inglehart, the kind of religion is much more important for the perception of women and their rights than the degree of religiosity. In his opinion, the Muslim tradition is one of the most powerful barriers to the development of gender equality. But it is worth remembering that Islam spreading some time ago in the Middle East and North Africa became part of local patriarchal tribal traditions. So it is not exactly Islam. With time, traditional code of honor mixed without religious principle. In culture of honor, which were and still are tribal and patriarchal cultures, honor has always been first and foremost the matter of men. But paradoxically, it fully depends on the women, wife, daughters, and specifically on her sexual chastity, or even on the neighbor's opinion about it. Sexist mentality and treating women instrumentally, which is so readily associated with Islam, largely result from the combination of living patriarchal traditions, poor education, poverty, and ambiguous message of the Quran. An overlap between tradition and religion has created a discrepancy between ethic and morality in the world of Islam. Socialization in the restrictive culture of honor and shame generates suppressed sexuality and sexual frustration of Muslim men and lack of respect for women who do not obey the rules of modesty. Lack of gender segregation in Western societies and emancipation of women makes the public sphere seem a sphere of temptation and sin. In other words, a life of Western metropolis is a sheer moral provocation for the Muslim people brought up in the cult of modesty. We can speak in the analysis of these events, we can speak of a combination of different situational and non-cultural factors which provoke or reactivate sexist thinking, script, and group behavior like Taharush Geimei. I suggest considering the following factors: social, demographic, biological, economic, psychological, and technological ones, which are closely connected in the case of the events under consideration. So, social factor refers first and foremost to abrupt erosion of the migrant social order. In the case of refugees, the present standards stopped normalizing their lives, still in their home countries ravaged by wars. Then there was a chaotic and traumatic crossing to Europe. Chronic uncertainty of the future mentioned in the German police report and deep cultural change do not foster quick reconstruction of the social order. So morality is one of the most important factors constituting social order. It requires, however, a community which regulates and controls the behavior of an individuals. And it is difficult to find one in a foreign city. Migrants have been uprooted from their homelands, but they have not yet settled in the new countries, and sometimes they do not know them yet. This transitional period, being a kind of suspension between the old and new world, is often a time of loosening morality. Old standards and their motivations do not work anymore, while the new moral order is not obvious or not sufficiently recognized. In the case of Taharush Geimei, an important social factor is also pressure exerted by the peer group and conformity of the young people yielding to this pressure, for whom the migrant group is the only or the fundamental group and a substitution community in the context of social alienation. So the second factor is demographic one. It refers to over-representation of young men in the migrant group who came to Europe at the peak of migrant crisis. According to the Pew Research Center data, over half of refugees who arrived in 2015 in Europe were young people aged 18-34. 3/4 of asylum seekers were men. Let us add that the men who came to Europe are mostly at their reproductive age, and they came without wives. In long-term perspective, long-term perspective generates deprivation and sexual frustration. Biological factor consists in the inclination of the groups with a homogeneous demographic structures. In this situation, it is the group of young men, to aggressive behavior. As sociobiologists and evolutionary psychologists argue, the mechanism triggering aggression appeared to be a tool to solve different adaptation problems, such as struggle for resources, competition to gain and keep a partner or social position. Okay. And psychological factors. Psychological factors refers to the poor sense of safety resulting from uncertainty of the future, work, stability. It generates frustration and aggression, as well as low self-confidence. Lack of work means no resources, low social status, and consequently low position on the matrimonial market. Particular challenge for the male identity of migrants is posed by sexually freed and professionally active Western women. Some time ago, Fatima Mernissi, Moroccan sociologist, claimed that described transformations in the gender roles in Muslim societies as one of the key events which confronted the world of Islam with modernity. Okay, next, economic factor. Economic factor is first of all lack of work and low social status which affect the identity of Muslim men. At this point, let us quote again the diagnosis of Fatima Mernissi, who already in 1970 warned against the fact that destabilized men uncertain of their future live in city slums and provincial Moroccan towns experiencing economic standstill. Their rural origin makes them experience the clash of values resulting from the new urban lifestyle even more intensely. Mernissi talks about a castrating dimension of the collapse of labor market. If labor, which defines male identity, becomes more available for women than men, men lose their masculinity since there is, it is quotation, there is no authority outside the male family, there are no men without money. So in this situation, Arab men are ambivalent about both inactive women, those who exert pressure on professional activity of men, and active women who symbolically castrate their male identity. And the last technological factor, it means common access to fast internet, which allows young people to spontaneously organize themselves in group of social media. But common access to internet means also common access to pornography, which shapes a special attitude towards women among the youngest generations, especially in Muslim countries. According to Philip Zimbardo, a negative effect of excessive porn viewing in the condition of social isolation are greatest among young people who had no real sexual contact before. It is so because they perceive sex only in terms of physical act, mechanically engaging parts of the body without feelings, emotions, intimacy, communication, negotiation, sharing, or even touching and kissing. As we can assume, addiction to porn websites does not contribute to shaping a personalized attitude to women in the Muslim world. So, my conclusions. Sexual assault on women in German cities on New Year's Eve 2015 make part a broader context of the clash of conservative values and those of liberalism of custom revealed in the study of the World Values Survey. The above analysis show that the European cases of group sexual harassment were an aftermath of cultural diffusion of new social practice, I mean taharush gaymay, and not of a traditional custom, but a custom which was generated at the very bottom of the society at the time of the Arab Spring in result of overlap of patriarchal Muslim perception of women and loosening morality. Therefore, the cultural factor has a significant importance in this case, but it is not isolated. It is activated in the situation of deprivation, sense of abandonment, exclusion, and frustration. Let us know that the practice of sexual harassment is considered to be blameworthy both in the Western and Muslim world. Across the world, there is also a discrepancy between religious code of ethic having the function of ideal models and everyday practice, behavior which is, I mean about behavior which is far from moral perfection, especially at the time of abrupt social transformations. The main cultural factor triggering this type of behavior is the patriarchal culture of honor, which in combination with the code of ethics take dignity and respect away from Western women. Ahmad Mansour, working with Arab young people here in Berlin, admits that all young Muslim, both men and women, fall victims of patriarchal structures. Mother convinced their daughters that they have to get married as virgins and should not study too much. Girls who adopt this way of thinking also criticize the girls who do not wear scarves or have a boyfriend. Boys share the same hierarchy of values in respect of women and use physical force to consolidate the patriarchal order. Restrained attitude to sexuality leads to a situation in which women perceive a man only as a potential rapist, while men see a woman as a property or a whore. In result, many young Muslims are not able to develop natural relations with the other sex. So, in conclusion, the most problematic cultural difference is in the relations between Muslim migrants and Western cities dwellers is now the attitude towards women, specifically contempt for women who do not meet the Muslim modesty standards. It is this intercultural difference that should undergo specific foundation work in the programs of cultural integration. So, thank you.
Thank you very much for giving us a very differentiated picture of behavior types and differentiating as well between the economic, social, cultural, and psychological and factors which influence such kind of behavior. And I found one of the statements quite interesting, which comes from Ingelhardt, I think, about the fault line is not democracy, but sex. If this is the case, what can we do? Promotion of pluralism, of democracy, or of private economy doesn't work. Dancing. Okay, wonderful. Okay, maybe you should construct a project for DOC in this regard. Yeah? Would be interesting. So, unfortunately, as usually in conferences, we have no time. But of course, I mean, if there are some pressing questions and comments, I would like to reduce and select maximum 5, please.